The morning sun bounced off the glass walls of the corporate tower, making it seem almost untouchable, like a monument to power. Marcus adjusted his tie nervously as he stood outside the building, clutching his worn leather folder. He had rehearsed this day countless times in front of the mirror, practicing his smile, straightening his posture, reminding himself to speak clearly. Inside the lobby, everything gleamed: marble floors, chrome railings, and the quiet hum of wealth and authority. The receptionist gave him a professional nod, though her eyes lingered just a moment too long, as if silently asking what someone like him was doing here. Marcus swallowed the discomfort, forcing his voice to remain steady as he introduced himself. Marcus Johnson. I'm the new intern for the strategy division. Her expression flickered, then she typed something into her computer. A badge was printed, handed over with a polite but distant smile. He pinned it to his jacket and thanked her, even though the pit in his stomach deepened. As he rode the elevator up to the 24th floor, Marcus thought about his mother's words that morning. You belong there just as much as anyone else. Don't let them make you feel otherwise. He replayed the phrase like a mantra, steadying his breath. The doors opened to reveal a maze of cubicles and glass offices. Conversations hushed as heads turned toward the newcomer. Marcus felt the weight of those stares, some curious, some indifferent, a few laced with doubt. He forced a smile, stepping forward with the quiet dignity he had learned to carry in spaces where he knew he might not be welcomed. A tall man in a crisp gray suit approached. His handshake was brief, his smile thinner than paper. You must be the new intern, he said. Richard, your department head. His eyes scanned Marcus from shoes to hairline, measuring, questioning. Follow me. We start on time here. Marcus nodded, gripping his folder tighter, and walked after him. Every step echoed like a test, as if the building itself demanded proof that he belonged. The day had only just begun, and already Marcus could sense that this internship would be more than a professional challenge. It would be a trial of patience, resilience, and strength. Marcus's first week moved slowly, each day carrying a quiet tension he tried to ignore. He arrived early, stayed late, and kept his notes meticulous. He wanted no one to question his dedication. But no matter how hard he worked, Richard, his department head, seemed to watch him with a permanent shadow of suspicion. On Thursday morning, Marcus stood at his desk, carefully preparing a presentation draft for the team meeting. He had spent hours refining the slides, making sure every figure was accurate. When Richard passed by, Marcus mustered the courage to speak. Sir, I've updated the market analysis you asked for. I believe this version highlights a few opportunities that... Richard didn't stop walking. He glanced at the screen, frowned, and interrupted with a sharp wave of his hand. Opportunities? You mean guesses? This is a billion-dollar firm, not a classroom project. A couple of nearby employees looked up, their eyes flickering between Marcus and Richard. Marcus felt the sting, but he forced his voice to remain calm. I cross-checked the numbers with the last quarter's data. They matched the projections fairly closely. Richard turned fully now, his lips curling into a condescending smile. Listen, Johnson. Around here, we don't survive on enthusiasm. We survive on results. You'd do well to remember that. The words were laced with something heavier than critique. It wasn't about numbers. It was about putting Marcus in his place. Marcus nodded stiffly. Understood. When Richard walked away, the silence of the office returned, thicker than before. A young analyst leaned toward Marcus and whispered just loud enough for him to hear, Don't take it personally. He's like that with some people. The pause afterward spoke louder than the words themselves. Marcus forced a small, tight smile, though inside his chest a knot was forming. He reminded himself again of his mother's voice. You belong there just as much as anyone else. But it was growing harder to believe it. The following Monday brought an unusual energy to the office. The strategy division was scheduled to present to senior management, a rare opportunity for interns to observe high-level operations. Marcus had stayed late the night before, double-checking figures, preparing backup notes for the meeting, just in case someone needed help on the fly. When the team filed into the sleek, glass-walled conference room, Marcus hung back, uncertain whether he was expected to attend. To his surprise, Richard glanced at him and gave a small nod. You'll sit in the back. Quietly. Don't speak unless spoken to. Yes, sir, Marcus said. The room filled quickly. Department leads, analysts, 2 VPs. The atmosphere was tense but focused. The presentation began. Numbers, forecasts, trends. Marcus followed along attentively, flipping through the printouts he had prepared. Halfway through the meeting, one of the VPS pointed to a chart on the projection screen. These figures seem off. Are we projecting a 17% growth in Q3? That doesn't align with last month's report. There was a pause. Richard looked momentarily uncertain. Marcus, scanning his notes, spotted the discrepancy immediately. A chart had been pulled from an outdated file. He leaned forward slightly. "Sir," he said quietly, not to disrupt, "I think the version from last week's update has the corrected figures. Page 4 in the packet." The room turned. Eyes were on him. The VP raised an eyebrow. Richard's face froze. "Did I ask you to speak?" he said slowly, voice low but laced with fury. Apologies, I thought," Marcus began, but Richard cut him off. "No. What you thought is irrelevant. You're here to observe, not to correct your superiors in front of the executive team." A cold silence descended over the room. The VP's mouth tightened, clearly uncomfortable. One or two heads dropped, eyes returning to their laptops. Richard turned to the intercom near the door. "Security, I need someone on 24, now." Marcus blinked. "Wait, what?" "Leave the room," Richard snapped. "Immediately." "You've overstepped." The word security echoed in Marcus's ears like a siren. His heart pounded. His throat dried. The white walls of the conference room suddenly felt suffocating. He stood slowly, each movement deliberate. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He couldn't afford to. The walk to the door felt eternal. Behind him, no one spoke. No one stood up. No one stopped it. Through the glass, Marcus saw the two uniformed guards approaching down the hallway. He had done nothing wrong. And yet, here he was, being treated like a threat. The shame burned through him, but beneath it, something colder began to form. Not fear, not confusion. Resolve. The two security guards approached briskly, calm, professional, but clearly unsure why they'd been called. One of them, a broad man with tired eyes, looked Marcus up and down with faint confusion. He didn't see a threat. He saw a young man in a neatly pressed shirt, holding a binder, standing still with his shoulders squared and his eyes steady. "Sir, we were asked to escort you from the floor," the guard said, voice low, as if embarrassed. Marcus nodded silently. There was no point resisting. He could feel eyes on him from the other side of the glass, some guilty, some indifferent, some pretending not to look. As he turned to walk with the guards, the elevator at the far end of the corridor dinged. The doors slid open, and out stepped three men in dark, tailored suits, members of the board. Their presence sent a ripple through the hallway. Employees straightened in their chairs. Conversations paused mid-sentence. The man in front, tall and silver-haired with a scar near his temple, scanned the scene with sharp eyes. He stopped abruptly when he saw Marcus flanked by the guards, his brows furrowed. Then his expression changed. Recognition first, then disbelief. "Marcus?" he said, voice loud enough to cut the silence. Marcus turned slowly. "Yes, sir?" The man stepped forward, waving off the security guards with one firm motion. "What is going on here?" One of the guards glanced toward the conference room for instruction. Richard, standing in the doorway now, visibly stiffened. "This intern was disrupting a senior-level meeting," Richard said curtly. "He spoke out of turn, challenged his superiors. I called security. Standard protocol." The board member's eyes didn't leave Marcus. "Your name is Marcus Johnson?" "Yes." A pause. The man turned to Richard, his voice ice-cold now. "This young man is the son of Dr. Elijah Johnson. I studied under his father. That man practically wrote the book on macroeconomic dynamics. Marcus was accepted into MIT at 17, if I recall correctly." A hush fell. People in the hallway stopped pretending not to listen. Richard blinked. I wasn't aware." "No," the board member said, stepping protectively beside Marcus. "You weren't. And that's exactly the problem, isn't it?" He turned to Marcus again, voice softening. "Are you all right, son?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir." "Thank you." The board member turned back to Richard. "You will step away from the strategy division immediately. HR will follow up within the hour. I'll be having a conversation with the CEO about this." We do not tolerate abuse of power in this company, especially not when it's rooted in bias. Richard's face drained of color. He tried to protest, but the words never formed. Inside the conference room, no one spoke. Outside, heads were slowly turning toward Marcus, not in judgment now, but in awe, in shame, in realization. And Marcus? He stood tall, not because someone had recognized him, but because he had never lowered himself to begin with. The hallway buzzed with low whispers, as Richard, still pale and stunned, was escorted, this time not by security, but by the sharp steps of his own downfall. The board member, Mr. Harold Whitmore, remained beside Marcus, like a shield of quiet authority. Within minutes, HR representatives arrived. The meeting, once a stage for power and pretense, had turned into a courtroom. People no longer looked at Marcus with skepticism. Now, they looked at Richard. In a private conference room, Marcus sat across from HR and two board members, including Mr. Whitmore. His voice was calm but firm as he answered every question. Yes, this wasn't the first time. He routinely dismissed my input, regardless of its accuracy. Yes, he publicly questioned my qualifications. Yes, there were other comments, subtle but consistent, enough to make it clear that I wasn't just an intern to him. I was a problem. Mr. Whitmore leaned back, arms crossed, anger simmering beneath his polished exterior. You shouldn't have had to endure any of that. I'm sorry, Marcus. The HR rep nodded solemnly. We've already begun reviewing Richard's conduct files. You're not the first to raise concerns, just the first to be punished for speaking. Marcus took a deep breath. I didn't want trouble. I just wanted to learn. Earn my place. Be seen. Mr. Whitmore replied, You've done more than that. You exposed something we should have seen long ago. Later that afternoon, an internal email swept through the company. Effective immediately, Richard Barnes is no longer with the firm. We remain committed to fostering an environment of fairness and accountability. Any employee who has experienced harassment or discrimination is encouraged to come forward. That single message did more than announce a dismissal. It cracked open a door long kept shut. Whispers turned to voices. Several junior employees, black, Asian, female, queer, began coming forward. HR was flooded with long silence complaints. A culture shift had begun, and at the center of it all stood Marcus. Not a symbol, not a victim, a catalyst. By day's end, Mr. Whitmore pulled Marcus aside. We want you to stay, not just as an intern. We'd like to offer you a full-time mentorship track, strategic development, partner-level grooming. You've proven you have more than talent. You have integrity under fire. Marcus was stunned. Thank you. I need to think about it. Of course, Whitmore said. But you should know, your father would be proud. Marcus looked out over the city skyline. For the first time, the glass tower didn't feel cold or unreachable. It felt like something else, something that could finally begin to change. The office didn't look different the next morning, but it felt different. Marcus walked in through the same glass doors, past the same marble floor, greeted the same receptionist. But this time, she stood up. Good morning, Mr. Johnson, she said, her smile no longer guarded, just warm. He nodded politely, still adjusting to the weight of being seen. When he stepped onto the 24th floor, heads turned again, but the looks were no longer curious or cold. They were respectful. One or two coworkers gave him small nods. Someone even clapped softly and others followed. Marcus felt a strange discomfort rise in his chest. Not because of the attention, but because none of it should have taken a public humiliation to be earned. By mid-morning, HR held a mandatory department-wide meeting. The tone was serious, but sincere. They spoke about workplace culture, subtle bias, the power dynamics of silence. They brought up Marcus by name, not as a case, but as someone who had demonstrated leadership under pressure. Marcus sat in the back row. Eyes flicked toward him often. Some were apologetic, others simply thoughtful. But for the first time, he wasn't invisible. He wasn't the intern. He was the one who'd stood tall when it would have been easier to disappear. After the meeting, a junior analyst named Lily approached him. She was white, in her late 20s, and looked nervous. I just wanted to say, I should have said something last week. When it happened, I saw how he treated you. I didn't speak up. and I regret that Marcus studied her for a second, then said gently, "Thank you. That means a lot." Later, he found an email in his inbox from a data engineer he'd barely spoken to. It read, "What you did took guts. You made things better for the rest of us. If you ever want to collaborate on something, I'm in." Around the office, conversations had shifted. People who had tiptoed around the topic of race before were suddenly asking real questions, listening more, reflecting. Even the company's Slack channels were active with change. Number diversity talks had doubled in members. A new mentorship program for underrepresented employees was launched. Anonymous feedback lines were made public. It wasn't perfect. It wouldn't be overnight. But the air felt different, lighter, sharper. In the midst of it all, Marcus stayed grounded. He continued to do his work, just as thoroughly, just as quietly. But now, when he spoke, people listened. Because now they had to. Because he had earned more than just their attention. He had earned their respect. 2 weeks had passed since the incident. In some ways, everything had changed. In others, nothing had. The office still buzzed with meetings, deadlines, and coffee runs. Spreadsheets still crashed. Emails still piled up. But something invisible had shifted beneath the surface. People talked more openly. Managers listened more carefully. The culture was beginning to tilt towards something closer to just. And Marcus, he walked through the halls no longer as a question mark, but as a force. Still, one decision hung over him like a quiet bell waiting to be rung. Mr. Whitmore's offer remained on the table. A full-time position, mentorship, a track to leadership. It was everything Marcus had worked for, everything his parents had sacrificed for. But the choice wasn't simple. He sat alone on a park bench during lunch, the skyline towering above him, the offer letter open on his phone. His father's name still lingered in every conversation people had with him. And as much as he loved and honored that legacy, Marcus didn't want to stand in his father's shadow. He wanted to cast his own. That night, he stayed late at the office, again. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to leave with clarity. He stood in the same conference room where Richard had humiliated him, looking out over the empty chairs. He saw something different now. Not a battlefield, not a prison, a platform. He pulled out his phone and composed a message to Mr. Whitmore. "I accept the offer, but with one condition. I want to be involved in shaping the mentorship program, not just as a mentee, but as someone who helps build it. I don't want the next Marcus Johnson to have to earn respect through suffering. I want it to be built into the system." The reply came just 5 minutes later. "That's exactly why we need you here. Welcome aboard, Marcus." On his first official day in his new role, Marcus wore the same tie he had on when it all began. Not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder of who he was, where he came from, and how far he'd come. Not because the world had made space for him, but because he had stood tall even when there was none. He took the elevator to the 24th floor. It opened to familiar faces, but this time they rose to greet him. And for the first time, Marcus didn't just walk through the door, he owned it.